church. And any sensible person can understand that one's own history has to be taken very seriously, otherwise we will be pushed out of the time and we will be flushed out in the long run of the passage of time. But nobody at the moment is interested to hear stories or histories. I don't know whether history is why a history, not her story. Maybe one of the reasons everyone hates it. It would have been more appreciable if her story is put in between his stories. Yeah, that's the way we are used and we are expected to. So, how much time we can? It's at 10 past 7 now.
8 o'clock.
8 o'clock with everything, interaction and everything. We will close by 8 o'clock. Is it comfortable for you? It's too heavy for you? You will be interested. We'll make it interestable. Yeah. Thank you. And I welcome each and everyone because of the summer, despite the fact that you have a lot of your own personal involvement in these days, but you made it a point to be present here with energetic faces and interest. Today, professionally speaking, this is not my subject at all. And from the perspective of a professional touch of the matter we discuss now, I'm just like any one of you. But we will make sense of our own history. History of the church is not the history of something or somebody, but it is our own history. That's why it's very personal and it is very important. And any history, secular or history of the church, is vast. And it's very difficult to remember important years and events as well as individuals, persons. But we present it in a very short form, and I expect more questions, and I would like to spend some time for interaction with you towards the end. Everyone knows that St. Thomas, the apostle, came to India, or precisely to Kerala, in the 1st century and believed to have arrived there in AD 52. There are a lot of scientific and historical evidences to corroborate this belief or historical fact. Our first statement is built in this presumption or historical fact. The church, which is called St. Thomas Christians, or the Thomas Christians, or more likely as Nasranis, lived for centuries. The denominations and the churches that are in good number in Kerala was not born until the 16th century. So an undivided Christian presence lived out in Kerala soil for the first 15 centuries. And we know from secular perspective that Kerala was made a colony by the Europeans, firstly by the Portuguese, from 1498 with the coming of Vasco da Gama till 1663, that is the middle of 17th century. When they were followed by the Dutch, they came to Kerala from 1663 to 1795 through the establishment of the East India Company, trade link firstly, and then naturally some mission work. But later on, the dominant powers of the Europe came to India from 1795 till the independence of India in 1947. This is also linked to the history of Christianity in Kerala, especially with our church. That's why I just made a fleeting comment about this. So we have been called the St. Thomas Christians or the Thomas Christians or the Nasranis up to 15th century or the early part of 16th century. And the way we lived, the spiritual or the administrative system can be said in one word as the way of Thomas. Thomayuda Margam, the way of Thomas. And the administration was mainly done by archdeacon, which in our vernacular is called Jadiki Kartavya. Maybe we were called a Jadi, a separate tribe or an ethnic group when the other dominant race is concerned. So this may be a remark made by others to distinguish Christians from the rest of the dominant population in Kerala, Jadiki Kartavya, the one who domain or exercise the lordship over the people, I presume. Then came, in the 15th century, the Portuguese. Portuguese people came in search of expansion of Christianity, propaganda fide, that means the propagation of the faith, especially by the French Catholic people. And they came to Kerala coast and they see the Nasranis undivided, strong Christian community over there. As we all know, the Catholic Church in those days, even to a certain extent, even today, think that is the only church and all other expression of faith done in the name of Christianity is invalid according to their parameters. So they tried their level best through political power and ecclesiastical power to convert these St. Thomas Christians to Latin rites, which is technically called a strong Latinization. Just like we say in Hellenization, it's a Greek thinking and way of life is inserting into the community. So is the case with the Latinization. The faith, practices, life entirely is made into Latin language and its way of worship. And its ethos as well, the Latin ethos from the west to the east. So the St. Thomas Christians undivided church was suffocated and they were stifled because of this kinds of a political and ecclesiastical invasion. And it continued for some time, but in 1663, the so-called Conan Cross Oath took place, precisely in Kochi near Mattancherry, where the people, the Nasrani, especially the St. Thomas Christians, gathered and they took an oath, shaking off the shackles of foreign incumbency, saying that we, from now until the end, as long as the heaven and earth, the sun and the moon live, we have no relationship. We shake off the foreign colonial powers and we want to be sons and daughters of the soil. This is being aroused because of their identity consciousness, that they are free citizens and they are the spiritual sons and daughters of St. Thomas, who begat them in Christianity centuries ago. And before the Covenant Cross Oath, which was provoked in a way by the act of one person through their ecclesiastical mother, who is Archbishop Meneses, who convened a synod called Synod of Diember in 1599. So the Covenant Cross Oath is an aftermath of this systematic Latinization. But when they shake off the foreign powers and declared independency, but they have nothing to work on. We are completely blank as to the spiritual administration and the exact mode of worship and the text they used in the first 15th or 16th centuries. So 12 priests gathered and they laid hand on a person from a family who is called a Parambil Thomas. And on May 22nd, 1653, they together ordained the first Marthoma Metropolitan. Then the church was divided. Because of the strong Catholic influence and Latinization, a sizable percentage of the Kerala people were made Latin Catholic. First division of within the St. Thomas Christians. Then there again came another set of people because of some ethnic priority is there. Latin Catholic is more or less the people living in the coastal area, mainly the fisher flock, And another St. Thomas Christians with good standing in the society, they formed another denomination which is called the Syro-Malabar Church. Even today, it is a strong church. Later on, the 20th century, came a new version, a third denomination within the Catholic Church, which is called the Malankara Church. So, for the first time, the undivided St. Thomas Christians were divided, we splintered into different denominations. What is the reason? Because of the coming of the foreigners. In the name of business or in the name of spreading Christianity. And they, dominant community, because of the political regime, they accused that the St. Thomas Christians head Marthoma first is not duly ordained because he was not ordained to the episcopacy by an episcopos, but he was made a bishop by 12 priests, which is invalid. I tell you a truth that if we trace the history of the Christian church, even the Roman Catholic Church, we can see that many a time bishops were ordained, even the patriarchs were ordained. One or two times even Pope were ordained, not by the bishops, but by priests. So sporadically it happened in history later on. So, but to take mileage politically and spiritually, they accused that this person, Marthoma first, is not duly ordained. So, Marthoma first made a request to the Eastern Patriarchs. He wrote letters to many churches, at least to send some bishop to regularize his ordination. The church, the St. Thomas Christians, had strong relation to the Eastern Church, which is called the Eastern Syrian Church, not the Western. Right now we are under the regime, or we use the liturgy of the West Syrian Church, means Antiochian Church, but previously we were in the East Syrian, precisely to say the Persian Church. Where St. Thomas, after evangelizing in India, went to China and even to Pakistan and some Persian countries also, and then he preached there and made Christianity there. So we had, because of the single patronage and of the apostolic origin, we were having good relation with the Persian church, not to the Antiochian church as we have or we are supposed to have at the moment. So then there was a time for the Marthoma Metropolitans as Malankara Metropolitans. Marthoma first, second, third, fourth, and fifth, and the sixth one. His time is 1765 to 1808. End of 18th century and early 19th century. In between, there came the West Syrian bishop. For the first time in the history of Christianity in India, and especially the Christianity of Kerala, or our church is concerned, the first bishop who came to Indian coast or Kerala soil is Mar Gregorios from Jerusalem in 1665. That means 17th century only, to regularize what is being accused of what happened to the early St. Thomas Christians. So, when the Latins came, they made the priest celibacy, the priest should be celibates. Then they throw away the use of the leavened bread with unleavened bread and so many other things. So when the West Syrian bishops, especially Mar Gregorios and his successors came, they regularized the liturgy, the faith and practices of the St. Thomas Christians, our church, in accordance with the West Syrian tradition. In those days, it is understood that either the leadership nor the faithful was good enough to discern that we had a relationship with another part of the Syrian tradition, which is called the East Syrian, rather than the West Syrian church, the Persian church, not the Antiochian church. But it continued. In the beginning, they never entered into the administration very strongly, and they made no effort to bring this church founded by St. Thomas under the supremacy of Patriarch of Antioch. But then the things changed in the long run of the time. And there were a strong presence of bishops from the Antioch, and they tried their level best to bring this church under their supremacy. So, then Marthoma 6, who is called the Great Marthoma, during his time, the so-called Vattipanam, a perpetual deposit created by the British. In the meantime, the British ruled in India, Kerala, and in little later time, they helped our church, our mission. Then Marthoma 6, who is called Dionysius I. Just remember, Marthoma 6 is otherwise called Dionysius I. You see, Marthoma name was adopted by the first to the sixth Marthoma because of their allegiance and affinity to the founder of the church, St. Thomas. But the foreign prelates insisted that this is not in accordance with the Syrian tradition. You have to adopt a new name, which they proposed as Dionysius. That's why Marthoma VI is named as Dionysius I. Then his ordination was also got regularized by some people. It is during his time that the Thodiur church, that means a bishop who was ordained by the Antiochian prelates, hoping that he can be a parallel Malankara metropolitan and the church can be brought under him, which for them is easy to supervise. But he cannot get the royal declaration or the royal backing of the Cochin and Travancore royal family, so he has to flee from Travancore to other parts of Cochin, which is beyond the Cochin state in those days, which is called Thodiur. So he established an independent, which is called Thodiur Independent Church. It's still surviving church, few in number. Then he was succeeded by Dionysius II, Dionysius III, Dionysius IV, who is called the Shepherd Dionysius Tirumeni, Philippus Dionysius Tirumeni, and then the Pulicotal second Tirumeni, who is called Dionysius V. Then they came for the first time in 1876, the first patriarch who visited Kerala, who is His Holiness Peter III. He divided one church under the supremacy of Marthoma, now called Dionysius Metropolitan, who is called a Malankara Metropolitan, into 6 or 7 dioceses. And he ordained new 7 bishops. You see? And one of the bishops was none other than our Saint Parmala Kochadirumeni. It continued. So the Antiochian Patriarch's supremacy or presence in the Kerala soil become stronger and stronger. There were followers. There were leadership. So it's already a parallel system which continued for some time. It continued. And after Pulicotal Dionysius V, then there came Vattasseril Tirumeni, who was ordained a metropolitan by Patriarch in Mardin, in Antioch, in foreign land. But his administration was challenged by parallel system of administration governed by the Patriarch. They asked, what is called Udambadi Treaty. And Tirumeni resisted and rebuked, but all means. Then he visited when Dionysius was powerful and came back as Malankara Metropolitan in the church. Patriarch himself came to Kerala and requested and sent the messages in many ways and means to Tirumeni that he wanted certain churches, its temporal powers, its assets to be given in a way surrender to Patriarch. Then he resisted vehemently. And then eventually Patriarch went to the church in Pudupalli, which was administered by, apart from the vicar and assistant vicars over there, then it was mainly handled, the temporal matters was handled by the the trustees, Kaikari. And they were members of some strong family traditionally, and there was no change of office for quite many decades. And the other people were resisting, and they were feeling bad about this. So he could easily get the appreciation of these two people, and 16 families out of the thousands of families, they got 16 families under their banner, and they gave this letter of surrender to them, Patriarch. And then the Patriarch went from pillar to post, went some churches to churches, and he went some churches appreciation, and he got a sizable number of churches in Kerala. It continues even today. But the litigations, there were a lot of catena of litigations about who is the real metropolitan, then who is the custodian of the assets, like the Padaya Seminary and the Vattipanam, which was deposited through the British for the welfare of the clergy over here, has to be fought in the civil court. And the first phase, metropolitan. So 2 factions naturally came. It is not created by intelligence means, but it naturally came. Those who favor allegiance to one faction under the regime or the rule of patriarch is Patrikis Vibhagam, Patrikis Baba, so Baba Kachi, and the churches which is bigger in number under the banner of the Malankara Metropolitan, which is called the Metran Kachi. So the Baba Kachi means the patriarchal faction, and Metran Kachi is the Malankara Metropolitan faction. And it became very clear the church is divided. And the litigation went and went. The first case, the Metropolitan succeeded. I mean, so he won the court order. Then they appealed. Then again they were defeated. Then they appealed. And in the royal court, appointed by the royal regime, by the royal family in Travancore, additional court was constituted to hear this matter, and 3 bench comprises. The entire verdict went in favor of the patriarch faction, which created a lot of agonies, pains, litigations, factions, feud, divisions in the family, businesses in, which created unrest to the law and order situation in Kerala. And it went on for a long time. Eventually, in 1958, the famous Supreme Court of India, the apex court in the land, gave a verdict in favor of Malankara Metropolitan. By the time Malankara Metropolitan is no more here, as Vattacheri Tirumeni passed away in 1934. But Vattacheri Tirumeni's distinctive contribution are 2. First, he was the brain behind the formation of a constitution for the church, which came into vogue in 1934. In the same year, he passed away. After this got passed in the general body of the church. And when he and his people were challenged by the patriarch through his powerful hands, Tirumeni and the other factions, our great fathers, proposed a solution to end this by appealing to the patriarch. The old Tirumeni personally went back to Antioch in Mardin and met the patriarch to bring close to the church, creating a peaceful situation. But it was rejected and he was dejected. Then came a light from, it's like a bolt from the blue, a patriarch who was sacked by withdrawing the firman, the official granting of permission to rule over the people in Turkey, His Holiness Patriarch Abded Mashiha and Abdullah Patriarch. So, when Abdullah Patrikis came here and tried level best, and then he went back in 1911 from Kerala to Bombay and Bombay eventually to his place, we got another patriarch who was canonically ordained, but he was not exercising power in those days because the firman or the royal declaration was withdrawn for political and other reasons, but canonically he was still an ordained, a genuine person, was brought to Malankara, and we established the Catholicate here. This Catholicate throne was established in the 4th century in Tigris. If you take the history of the Universal Church, so that's why Catholicos of the East in our title, you know. Catholicos, His Holiness Marthoma Matthews III, Catholicos of the East is not precisely India, but the Eastern entire region in those days, which had a dominant Christian presence, but is in a diminishing mode at the moment. So that throne is re-established in Malankara, in 1912, precisely September 15th, 1912, in Neranampalli by His Holiness Patriarch Abdul Abdid Messiha. And the first Catholicos elected and consecrated is Morimattathil Mar Ivanios Tirumeni, Basilios Paulus the first. And then came Geevarghese first, Mallikatudera Baba. And third is Geevarghese the second, Kurichi Baba. Then came Auge first Baba. And then came Matthews the first, otherwise called His Holiness Patakune Baba Tirumeni, succeeded by Matthews the second, or Shastamata Baba, the ancient Baba. Then he was succeeded by Didymus first, the Baba Tirumeni, who was succeeded by Paulos second, because the first Baba is called Paulus I, so he was Paulus second, whose great memory of good remembrance is to be celebrated in the coming days. And then comes the present Baba Tirumeni. They are, in a way, two offices are merged in their title. They are the Malankara Metropolitan, even though good size of members of the church is deserted and formed their own denomination, but still he is the successor of Saint Thomas the Apostle, who established the Christian church, and we have the uninterrupted legacy with some irregularities in the liturgy or the worship and the internal spiritual matters, which is corrected by people with timely help, actually not ownership. And at the same time, the Catholicos is the Catholicos of the East. So the Malankara Metropolitan, and at the same time the Catholicos of the East is merged into the two titles and two capacities. And the church is governed mainly by the 1934 Constitution and its bylaws, from the grassroots, the unit, I mean parish level to the diocesan level to the entire church. This is the administration system, and this is the whole big story in the small nutshell form. Questions? If you understood something, you can raise question, or if you don't know, you can any question.
Tirumeni, there is a question.
Yeah. So, do we preserve any traditions from the original Malankara church? Because we adopted the West Syriac tradition, right? Do we preserve any of the Syriac or even Latin practices in our practices today?
So it's a good question. See what literally we follow, even this attire and the ordination way. Everything at the moment is the impact of the tradition which we adopted in the 17th century from the West Syrian tradition. Officially, that church is headed by the Patriarch Khalid the third. But previously, our relationship was not with this church, but the Persian church. Or in another way, the church in India, our forefathers were, in the matters of doctrine and faith, were Nestorians, because Eastern church.
Do we preserve any of that tradition today?
Unfortunately, that is dissolved in history, and there is no tradition. That's why I said before the arrival of this, maybe because of the fact that in 1599, after the Synod of Diamberg, Archbishop Meneses put an order through ecclesiastical and political powers, capture all the liturgical text, even from the churches, parishes, and from the homes, put together as mounds of books, and it is burned out.
So if it was lost and then you got the Syriac liturgy or anything, shouldn't we say oh we're St. Peter's, it's this there still in Syrian for Syrian Syrian? Or should we say we're like the our father says in or
See, the church in India was founded, if you are an Episcopal church, because there are other ways of Christianity, Christian origin in Kerala. For example, modern times, the Pentecostal church is very strong in Kerala. They don't take any Episcopal or Apostolic origin of their own. But coming to this Joshua's question, the church in Antioch is founded by Saint Peter, but the church in India was founded by Saint Thomas. But later on, just because to regularize the church to the Eastern way, there came knowingly or unknowingly a leadership which came to the land from the Western church, and through their dominant and concerted effort down through the centuries, the church in administration almost and in every mode, the contour and the texture itself has changed to the Antiochian style. But there is another story to another side to this as well. When the British came and the CMS missionaries helped our church in the establishment of the seminary in Kottayam in 1815, our church got some kind of benefit, but at the same time they got some kind of they found some irregularities or some fault with the faith and practices of the church, even the doctrines, with their strong Protestantism. So one man's idea, precisely for example, Maramal Yakob Kashisha, Palakunnatha Yakob Kashisha changed some version of an existing Syrian taxa, the Syrian Malayalam taxa, deleting a reference to Mary and prayers to the departed, which is the salient features of Orthodox worship. And he started theologizing this in Kerala soil and started worshipping. That is the beginning of a division within our church. And after some time in 1889, they formed a new church which is called the Mount Carmel Church. I'm happy that you people, even this is a very heavy going to the clergy as well sometimes, because everyone is not interested with the, as I said, with the history. But you people are very much aware of this, and I am very curious to see that good questions are being raised by our youngsters. I see a good future of the church and their involvement in the church as well. Yeah. Anyone can ask any question related to this subject already, or we have a time.
So this church doesn't believe in Nestorian.
Pardon me?
This church doesn't believe in Nestorian beliefs, right?
Yeah, at the moment the church don't believe in, but there is a church in Kerala which believe or follow. They are the followers of the Nestorian faith.
And also
But-
Orthodox?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it's called a Nestorian church itself. Yeah, the
Church of
Chaldea, the Chaldean church, But today we are living in the 21st century with all the so-called heresies, heretical teaching, schismas, analyzed in the light of theology and research, and basically, in principle, no one is identified as a heretic. That's why the Roman Catholic Church is having dialogue with all these kind of denominations spread across the globe. And even we dialogue with the last synod, we proposed that we can have a dialogue with even the Periyur Independent Church. We have already started the dialogue with the Marmama Church. Because in those days, because of the misunderstanding and with the other some cultural factors or linguistic factors, church were divided. As you know, the great divide in 1050 or with the Eastern Church and the Roman Church happened for centuries. And only in the modern times it was reverberated.
In between all of this, where did the Marthoma Church come in between, or like where did it start, or how did it start?
It started not because of administration, it started with the faith and practices of the church. Because the British came as they are basically the Protestant ideas, because there are lower church and higher church. And one faction are completely a kind of Puritans which purge all the other elements, use of incense, use of Mary or prayer to the departed, all that salient features which the entire Episcopal churches worshipped and practiced and believed for centuries have been eliminated. So the spirit, something new, was appearing to certain people, and they gathered and they formed a new church. And there came, in those days, he was Abraham, the Abraham Kashisha's nephew, was sent to the Syrian patriarch, and he got ordained, and he came as the Malankara Metropolitan. When the Malankara Metropolitan of our church is residing here, he went there and he got ordained as a Malankara Metropolitan as a Parakunda the Mathis Marathanius first. And then after his death, his nephew was also ordained as Thomas Marathanius. And he was not really. These two bishops were not an entirely Protestant or evangelical in spirit, but later on, when people and some other followers are typical, even now they are inclining and they never want to be known as a Protestant church, or rather they would call them as a Reformed Eastern Orthodox Church. Because they have monasticism, they use almost like a vestibule like this, especially with the bishop and the Malankara Metropolitan, you know. Yeah. So it was nothing to do with the administration, but because of the faith and practice. Just like the Protestant church, other Protestant churches and the Pentecostal, it's nothing to do with the administration, but the faith of the church is entirely different. So they create a new church. Yeah.
How did like evangelical influence get into India? Because like the Pentecostal churches, Lutheran churches, and all that, how did that reach India?
They are getting a good momentum, and just like the world over, even in this country, so it's the case in Kerala. But what the theology they profess, what the spiritual practices they imbibe, is called into question because of the aberrations of faith, or the practices they follow, or the social impact which they emanate in certain pattern of worship and the practices they do, which is not in line with the preaching. I preach, drink water, and I drink wine. That's that. She also raised her hand. Ladies first. Yeah.
So when we look at the list of the names of Catholicos from like 1911 or 1912, we don't see the name Marthoma until it's the Catholicos, Marthoma the first. Why did we adopt Marthoma, and why was it not there?
It just when they organized the name, appealing name, His Holiness Basilios, Geevarghese, Paulus first. In those days, it was not that much in our mind, because we are already the followers or the successors of St. Thomas Christians. But maybe because another church, just like the church which came in the 20th century, is precisely called the Marthoma Church. So maybe after a second thought on this kind of a historical inconsistency, our church adopted. And His Holiness Basilios Marthoma the First, Matthews the First, means fondly called Baba the Rimini, was very much aware of the historical facts, and he was a man with such a vision. So he insisted that this Marthoma should be recaptured into the title. So when he was ordained as the Catholicos, he was the first to use the Marthoma along with his title, and then it follows even.